Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast here on the Independent Activist from Belfast. I'd like to invite you all to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on YouTube to help increase the number of people who get an opportunity to hear and watch this podcast today. We're joined by His Excellency, the former retired Ambassador to Ireland, Dr Saeb Shaath. It's a pleasure having you with us today, Dr. Shaath. Thank you very much for joining us. I recently heard you give a talk, and it was really about the parallels between Irish history and what's currently happening in Palestine, and indeed has been happening for the last 100 years. I thought it very informative, and I thought it very interesting, and that's one of the main reasons why I've invited you today, because I'd like a wider audience who weren't at that conference to be able to hear your perfect description of the reasons why people in Ireland potentially support the people in Palestine as Indigenous peoples that have suffered under occupation. So just whenever you're ready, brother, if you'd like to tell us what you told people at the conference, we could take things from there. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. I would gladly reiterate some of the points which all link to the global imperialism and how the imperialist forces at the time were the French and the British trying to swallow the world resources and control the important and strategic geopolitical position. And Palestine, as I always say, was cursed with its genius geopolitical position, which is, you see, an area like Gaza, it's a connection between Africa and Asia and then Europe. And at the same time, Gaza is the key to the connection of the heart of the Arab world, the North African side of the Arab world and the Asian side. Once you control that area and control that position of Palestine, then the whole of the Arab world and that which is South Asia will be as well easy for the imperialist forces to control. And that brings us to what I called it yesterday, the French connection. The Zionist project, this uprooting colonial settler project, was the idea and developed by Bonaparte and the French imperialists around Bonaparte at the time. They claim it was a French Revolution kind of concept, which called the Jewish emancipation. To me, that slogan, I think, is the most anti-Semitic, if you want to use that term, which developed by Germans, unfortunately. It's because since they were looking at the cleansing the Jewish population from Europe and sending them to Palestine, so the French can use them in controlling and colonizing Palestine and parts of Egypt. And this Bonaparte campaign, which is launched to occupy Egypt and Suez and Palestine and failed and then kicked out of Palestine, they published themselves a call in the French official gazette during the siege of Akka, when they went in Akka, which occupying Palestine and besieged the city on the sea with massive, formidable walls. The Bonaparte stated in the ad at the time that Napoleon Bonaparte calls on the Jewish support and the Jews to support France and to seize the moment, as they said, of his presence in Palestine to settle in the area from Acre to Alexandria. This is the way they look at how to control the East Mediterranean. But this project, if before I reached to the Egyptian, was defeated, since it couldn't conquer the city, the French emperor of the world, Bonaparte, couldn't conquer the city of Akka or Acre, and they couldn't conquer or occupy Gaza. as well besieged Gaza for a long period of time, and then committed massacre at Java, which today they call it Tel Aviv, and they turned the Mediterranean Sea in the folk stories and songs in Palestine to red, become a sea of blood from the massacres the French committed. When the French left Palestine, because then the Egyptians started the revolution. And there's a young man called Suleiman al-Halabi, whose his roots from Aleppo, but he's raised and lived in between Jerusalem and Gaza, and mainly Gaza, uh, was the one who in Cairo targeted with the group of revolutionary from guys from Gaza. Uh, the French campaign leader at the time, called Kleber, since Bonaparte left to do business after his campaign failed in Palestine to do and to finish his business in Europe. So they assassinated Kleber, and then they erupted, the whole Egypt erupted in a revolution against them. And the French start running away from Egypt, and they were defeated, and they left Egypt. The English then, the British Empire, picked up on where the French failed, and they were developing designs as well to project their imperialist goals in the region, using the same kind of tactics. So they seen their competitors, the French, if they come and control that region, brother, will be it means to the British Empire the routes to India or Australia and controlling the British Empire, which is looting the whole world at the time, will be in deep trouble. So they decided, the British, they will the ones who are going to occupy Egypt, and they're the ones who are going to go and occupy Palestine. They occupied Egypt in 1882, and then they were designing after from that occupation to take Palestine, which means in the First World War they have to develop forces to start destabilizing the presence of the Ottoman in Palestine and the region. And the British waged from 1916 to end of 1917 three major wars from Egypt on Gaza. They failed in the first two, and then they brought the general in Lemby, which they call him the Bear, who brought railway tracks from Egypt to Gaza, water pipelines from the Nile in Egypt to Gaza to sustain his soldiers to the great war of taking Gaza. And they managed to cheat the Palestinian defenders in Gaza when they divert their attack to Beersheba and took and occupied Gaza after that. Since then, that's around December 1917. Since then, the British managed to occupy the rest of Palestine and to conquer even further Lebanon and Syria. And we discovered from the Bolshevik Revolution at the time when the Bolsheviks they put to the word in October 1917 that there was a Sykes-Picot agreement between the imperialist forces, the British, the French, and the Tsar of Russia at the time to divide the region among themselves. And that's what they were promising the Arabs at the time to align themselves with the British so they can defeat the Ottoman Empire and the Arabs would become sovereign in the Arab world. But it's since the exposing of the Sykes-Picot, it became very clear that the British will have their own design to occupy this area. And linking that, the British developed the designs to eject the Jews from Europe to Palestine and to use them as the colonial settlers in Palestine to further, as I said, the British Empire colonial domination on the region and to protect its trade routes and looting routes as well. They used Ireland because they occupied Ireland from the 12th century as the I call it myself the island was the laboratory which is the British used to develop their British colonial settler projects around in Palestine or around different areas in the world. As the English began this process in Ireland from, as I said, from the 12th century. They started bringing into Ireland British farmers and workers to replace the Irish indigenous people, which especially the planters in the Ulster area, the plantations, and the planters project, which is in Palestine, today they call it the colonial settlers project. The plantation of Ulster, early 17th century, the indigenous population in Ireland were butchered and expelled to out of their own lands to bad lands, the mountains, the bogs. In around the 1640s, there was an uprising against the planters by the Irish indigenous people. Many were killed, and that brought massive campaign, military campaign from England, which is that campaign caused so many deaths in the Irish population. So this is the way the Zionist entity were designed as a copy of the British colonialization of Ireland. The little loyal Jewish Ulster, as I think the military governor of Jerusalem called it in Palestine, to create, which is a copy of Ulster in Palestine. This is, I call it, the mechanics of genocide, since the goal is to control the land and its resources, to expel the indigenous population, the cleansing of the ethnic cleansing of the people. All of that amounts to genocide on the move, and this is a project not just the English. You know, if you want to look, it was done and developed as well after that in what they call the New World, and the French did that as well in so many colonies, especially the idea of Judaization of Palestine, to make Palestine as part or piece of West Europe. It was a copy of what the French colonization done in their war of occupation and colonizing Algeria. They brought the settlers, the French settlers from France, and they planted them in Algeria, and they called huge districts from Algeria as parts of France. And we know as well the deserts of Algeria were used for the French later on in the 40s and after that and the 50s to develop their nuclear capabilities. And they used their nuclear testing, the Algerians on the French on on Algeria and Algerian people. This is and this is where we can understand as well what is the French give the Zionist terror organization before even they declare their sovereignty held by the British on Palestine in 1947, I think, for their former president called Beres, who was linked with the French, and the French give them as a gift at the time a nuclear testing laboratory. Imagine you can give a nuclear testing laboratory a gift to a terror organization who brought the British brought from Europe and East Europe to intimidate the Palestinian population. And that's where is the demonic nuclear reactor, and the history of it came from a French gift to a terror organization which the Zionist entity have. So from here we can see that the roadmap, which is the Balfour Declaration, was designed And this Balfour Declaration itself, to give the things its context, before it was published, was approved by the American president, the text of it, Woodrow Wilson, and then the French and the Italians as well approved that to give to make Palestine as a homeland for the Jewish people and to make them sovereign in there and ignoring the rights of the indigenous Arabs who lives in Palestine. This brought straight away when the British occupation of Palestine, say the end of 1917, 1918, from the 1919, you can see the start of military resistance in Palestine against the British brutalities, which is they see in the local indigenous people. This is not just occupation. This is occupation bringing colonial settlers and exactly doing what the planters did in Ireland. And this is brought many revolutions started in Palestine. The Jerusalem al-Quds revolution, the revolt of 1920, and then it continued to February, and thousands of people joined that, and even they centered around Jerusalem with the huge marches. Over 50,000 people submitted the demands, a list of demands, in February 1920 to the British colonial power and the European diplomats who were based in Jerusalem, demanding to bring an end to Jewish immigration and the cancellation of the Balfour Declaration. So the people at the time, they were aware of what the British imperial forces doing, but they refused. This is continued to April as well of the same year in Java, and it was massive uprising and become developing some sort of military clashes with the colonial powers at the time. And in 1921 as well, that's continued the marches and the clashes with the British, and they were demanding as well the same demands: cancellation of the Balfour Declaration and stopping of the Jewish immigration to Palestine. In 1922, then Britain deployed its own what they call it the mandate police, which was 95% of it. It's based on the recruited 95% of it black and tans, led by General Henry Tudor at the time, who is the founder of the black and tan himself. And this paramilitary police force devastated the Palestinian population straight away. They were very infamous for their own violence and going and drunken, even orgy of killings, bringing their soldiers in the dawn hours to burn villages, to kill Palestinian farmers. Anybody who dared raising a stone against the British occupation were tortured and killed, or their own collective punishment to the whole villages. This is continued up to 1929, what we call it Al-Buraq Revolution, which is Buraq is the name of the what we call it today the Wailing War in Jerusalem. That is since the Palestinians they clashed with this influx the British brought of people to occupy the gates of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the holy sites, and that stopped the first kind of face-off, if you would like, between the British occupation and the Zionist gangs with religious cover against the Palestinians. And the British then started with the black and tan, of course, brutalities, destroying all the communities who participated in that and selecting the Palestinian leadership for execution. And they executed many of the Palestinian leaders at the time of the revolt. For them still engraved in our memories, in our folk songs, the martyrs Muhammad Jamjoom and the martyr Fuad Hijazi and the martyr Atazir with their hand and their images is still, you'll see even kids today in Palestine refer to that. It was the first step in developing kind of militarized resistance against the British occupation to be in a large scale. That in its own led us to what the British faced at the time in 1935. Between that 29 to 35, lots of little revolts happened here and there on marshes and protests and political kind of campaigns and Palestinian national conferences to organize the Palestinian people and their leadership around the goal of liberation. Then suddenly in 1935 appeared the Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, which is the Qassam Brigade today of the resistance Palestine, called after this man, who formed their first mobile guerrilla military warfare against the Zionists and colonialists and the British patrols who were wreaking havoc among the Palestinian population, and that caused a huge kind of panic among the British and the Zionist kind of organizations and military bases. Qassam armed revolution was a turning point in the history of the Palestinian national movement. It paved the way for the revolutionary movement that will prevail in Palestine years to come, and showed the martyrdom who was the Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam and his comrade, which is they were, I believe at the time they were a kind of encirculated and assassinated one by one. And that this is paved the way for the Palestinian great revolt of 1936 to 1939. I will talk about at this point if you want me to.
Yes, no, that's fascinating, I have to say, and it's very much in line with what you said at the conference. I think it's very important that people get to know these facts, people get to know about the history of Palestine and the Zionist movement. And maybe like just to add kind of my own personal opinion, that, you know, Zionism was born in the 1880s, 1890s. It was a reaction to European anti-Semitism. So there was no anti-Semitism that I would be aware of in the Levant. If you look at a present-day country like Iran, one of the biggest religious groupings in Iran outside of Islam is the Judaic tradition. Those people see themselves as Iranian Jews, not as Zionist Jews, not as people who want to flee from Iran in order to migrate to Israel. In fact, the leaders, the rabbis in Iran have said consistently that they are very happy to live in Iran. They see themselves as Iranian. I know it was mentioned before that they do not allow DNA tests in Israel because the DNA test will prove that these are not Semitic people. These are Europeans like Russians and Germans and French and indeed Americans and British people who have been converted to Judaism and are not actually from the land of Sham. Now, when it comes to the history of Israel, Israel was born through terrorism. It survives through terrorism and it expands through terrorism. The Stern Gang, the Lehi, and the Palma were the three main groups that were involved in displacing and replacing Palestinians. And the likes of the Jewish National Fund in 1902 was buying up land in Palestine for migrant Jewish people to go and live there, to flee the anti-Semitism that was rife in some parts of Europe, including Russia. But those kibbutz, or whatever the original basis was for the land grab, the land acquisition, were specifically for Jewish migrants, Palestinians, Muslims, and Arabs were not allowed to work on that land. They were setting up an apartheid state in 1902, long before the partition of Palestine in 1947. But brother, with respect, I'd be very interested. You chatted about Balfour. You've given us a background to how the Zionist state came into being. But the baton has been passed on from the British to the Americans. With about 10 minutes left, could you, in your opinion, explain why America is so invested in the Israeli colonial project, why it's supplying 2,000 and 5,000 pound bombs to murder innocent men, women, and children living in tents, why it's using starvation as a weapon of war, and why it is allowing the ethnic cleansing and indeed the ethnic genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. What is in this for the American administration, the American deep state, and American kind of, it's not soft power, it's military power throughout West Asia? Why do they back Israel? What's in it for America? And what's the American long-term aim? Never mind the Israeli long-term aim for the colonial project as it is.
You see, to follow up from where I stopped, in Palestine happened, as I said as well yesterday, there is a great revolution, we call it the Great Revolt, 1936 to 1939, continued after the martyrdom of the military campaign of Izzeddin al-Qassam. And this accompanied with the Palestinian Great Strike, which is self-disobedience. Nobody dealt with the British buying or selling or even going to their any of their institution, which is the mandate created as they call the Palestine Mandate Government. And this then accompanied by military, wild, even military campaign against the British occupation and the Zionist groups and the terror gangs in the that in its own devastated the British and showed the Palestinians were able to liberate large cities. Then they brought a huge armed forces, the English, from Iraq, the base of Habbaniya, from Cyprus, from Greece, from Egypt, even from India, all landed in Palestine and reinforcing as well their black and tan police. And they started a campaign, which is after 6 months, they couldn't defeat the Palestinians. They used the Arab leadership. And this is very important. The Arabic official leadership at the time, the kings and princes of Arabia, like the king of Saudi Arabia, Imam of Yemen at the time, the prince of Jordan, which is the grandfather of the kings today of Jordan, and as well the king of Iraq, who told and persuaded the Palestinian national leadership of the revolution at the time, the English king will give you self-determination, right of self-determination, and stop the Jewish immigration to Palestine. And in that agreed the Palestinians to stop the Great Strike and stop. And the Arab leadership called the strike is off and called that there is no revolution in Palestine. Not even the Palestinian, he called that. So the revolution, the strike stopped. But then the English came and then they said, no, we didn't promise anything to the Palestinians. They negated everything they promised the Arab. And then the military campaign continued from the Palestinians, and it's become up till the early 40s, the Palestinian small national nation, in Palestine was devastated with the amount of British soldiers and the British military presence and campaign against them. And this is a prepared the ground for Nakba, the greater Nakba. The British managed at the time to cleanse many of the cities and the villages and to hand it to these what they call it, the planters, which is the kibbutz, as you mentioned, and these colonies for the Zionists. And the cities like Java become Tel Aviv, a cleanse of a lot of Arabs from it. And by 1946-47, the British were tired from after the Second World War, of course. They couldn't sustain occupying Palestine, so they handed the flag of the mandate to the Americans. And the Americans came in power with the idea straight away to partition Palestine. With the English, when they agreed on that, they were arming the Zionist gangs to continue its campaign to swallow as much as land as they can. And with these Arabic officials, which I mentioned during the Palestinian Revolution, who called to stop the Great Strike, they the same ones who were puppets for the English, and their armies controlled by English generals, and their countries under English occupation. They give the smoke screen like there is Arab national forces going to help the Palestinian to liberate their land, and those armies, of course, get defeated by the Zionist entities, terror thugs at the time. And so they tell the world it's a fair war. Though Arab lost this Goliath and David style campaign, and the Zionists won. And this all of that was designed by two, the British and the Americans. The Americans looked to inherit the British Empire and all the interest which is represented for the imperialist forces. Palestine, I say, was the heart of the geopolitical control of the Eastern Mediterranean. And usually in history, if any empire doesn't control the Eastern Mediterranean, that's what the imperialists think. Okay, it's their empire is not secure, and their days will be numbered. So they need to inject more power in that area to devastate this area, and that's where is the Zionist entity was formidable force invested in it by the Americans and by the British before them to control the resources and these puppets which they create in East Asia and the Arab world. And let's remember, Zionism doesn't mean just the Jewish Zionists or the Christian Zionists in the United States. There is Arab Zionists who been created and manufactured in Arabic countries to guard the imperialist goals. And you can see them in the Gulf states, you can see them in Arabia, you can see them in Jordan, you can see them around Palestine. And those puppets who ruling these countries are parts of the American imperialist design to control the region. And the Americans' control is being suck the wealth of the nations in that area, devastate these areas now and then. If you look at the area, every from 6 to 7 years, there is a huge military campaign in it, led by the Zionists or led by the Americans themselves or by terror groups created and funded and trained by the United States of America or the Zionists, wreak havoc in the region. As the Zionists coined a term for it, they call it mowing the lawn. Any growth, any leadership, anything they take it. We call that term before them. We call it de-development. The de-development by the Zionists or the Americans or the imperialists means any growth in knowledge, in power, in resources, in leadership, in management have to be erased from that area. The Arab world and West Asia have to be pushed to be backwards. This is because that area control nearly 40% of the energy of the world, oil and gas. That's one. It's controlled the water ways and land ways and even skies to connect the world from there. It's the corner. If you look at the Palestine in the heart of the waterways and the landways which connect Asia, Africa, and Europe. This is the wall. That's why controlling this region for the American, it's part of projecting its own power on the world. Losing Palestine to the resistance after the 7th of October, if the Palestinian resistance managed to stand the ground and managed to defeat the goals of the Zionist entity of cleansing the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, the American project and dominating the world will shrink, and with it, the Zionist entity will shrink. So this function state, which the Zionist entity, which was, as we said, was designed from the times of Bonaparte till Trump coming Trump right now, will means have to do its own functions which created for. But today, what we see, who is fighting the wars in the Middle East? We see when the Iranian sent their response called the Promised Response 1 against the Zionist attack on their embassy in Damascus, who targeted the barrage or the salvo of the Iranian rocket missiles and the wave of drones. It was the United States of America, the British, the French, the Jordanians. So this Zionist entity, and the same thing with the second wave. And now the United States of America deployed what they call it THAAD missiles, which is only run by Americans and only American technology. Even this Zionist don't know how to use it for protecting this Zionist entity against any attack coming from Iran, in response, of course, to the Zionist attack on Iran. That shows this Zionist entity, the functioning state, is losing its functions. It's not as strong as before, as it was created. Today, it needs the protection of the United States of America and the whole Western elite. We've seen after the October 7th operation by, I call it the counterattack of the Palestinian in the concentration camp of Gaza against their occupiers. We've seen after 1,200 men when they attacked the Zionist entity and attacked what they call it the division of Gaza. They shocked the United States of America and the whole West and all the Western leaders, from Biden to the German to the British to the French. All of them rushed to sustain and support the Zionist entity, and they send them all, open all arsenals of weapons to them, and airlifts non-stop from this massive bombs, American bombs, against tens of refugees, because they want to sustain the presence of empire in there. They see their functioning state is losing a ground, and that's why all the West together have to show they are investing in this functioning state. Otherwise, they cannot control West Asia. Otherwise, they cannot control the hub of energy. Otherwise, they cannot control the heart of the world, which means they will become a superpower, all the Western collective with the United States, a superpower in equal, more or less, like China or Russia. And this is the equation which Gaza exposed their, as they call it, the paper tigers in this Zionist entity. As a functioning state, it's not doing any of its functions. This is why you see the United States of America very aggressive there, and you will see it with Trump coming, Donald Trump more aggressive, since Trump even with his collective of administrators coming to this administration are more Zionist, and they think Biden, genocide Jew, was weak in the front of the Palestinian resistance. And they have a term or acronym called OHS or something, organization supporting Hamas, OSH. This is unbelievable what you see and what the Trump is coming. And even say, when I look at the map, I see Israel is tiny, which means he wanna recognize their sovereignty maybe in the future in the West Bank and maybe parts of Jordan. Maybe you don't know of these not cases who are lack of knowledge of geography and history and politics and resolve of nations don't help them in taking the right decisions.
I'd like to thank you very much for your contribution today, Dr. Shaath. That's absolutely amazing. It's always an honor, and it's always inspirational, and it's always influential to hear your take on what's happening, especially from someone who's from Palestine and someone who's not just speaking in a place aside or watching this from afar, but someone who has their heart and their dreams and their aspirations and their hopes for the future of the Palestinian people in your DNA as well as your heart. I'd just like to say in conclusion that you are the patron of Palestine Aid. It's a local registered charity in the north of Ireland, and we have a ticker tape at the bottom of the screen to encourage people to donate. I believe that the charity at the moment is feeding displaced people in Palestine as we speak. And just in conclusion, my own thoughts on the American administration. America, from its inception, from its liberation or independence from the British Empire, has been at war every year since its liberation, apart from 2 decades. When we look at how they stole half of Mexico, the regime changes, coups, civil wars that they sparked in South America, Latin America, and the Caribbeans, and when you see the destruction of Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and the millions of people who died there, and the Korean War and the partition of Korea and the wars, illegal wars on Iraq, the attack on Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, throw a dart at a globe of the world, and there's not one country that hasn't suffered from American military, financial interference, and they are the biggest threat to world peace. And I would suggest that Israel is next in line. I'd like to thank you again from the bottom of my heart, and I hope that we'll get to speak again on future topics. Dr. Shaath, thank you very much, brother.